He could tell from her posture and the way she asked questions of the village head that she wasn't like the other bureaucrats who often came from the city, scribbled a few notes, and left without making any real impact. In the heart of Yoruba land, between thick forests and rolling hills, lay the village of Okiroko. It was a land of fertile soil, where farmers toiled day and night, harvesting the bounty of their labor. The people of Okiroko were a tight-knit community, and though modernity was slowly creeping in, tradition still held strong. Every family knew their role, and everyone knew their neighbors. And among them was a man named Adisa, the pride and paradox of the village. Adisa was a man of great stature, towering over most men in Okiroko. His broad shoulders and muscular frame spoke of years spent working under the sun, tilling the land, and tending to the vast fields of yam, cassava, and cocoa that had been passed down through generations of his family. He had inherited not just the land, but also the reputation of his father and grandfather before him, hard-working men who had earned the respect of the village. And yet, despite all that Adisa had accomplished, there was one thing that set him apart, one thing that turned admiration into fear and respect into whispers: his oversized penis. It had been this way for as long as Adisa could remember. When he was younger, the girls of the village had giggled about him behind his back, though he hadn't understood why at the time. It wasn't until his late teenage years that the reality of his condition became painfully clear. Adisa's manhood was unusually large, so large that it had become the subject of gossip, mockery, and, in some cases, fear. What had been a source of quiet pride for the men of Okiroko, his strength, his work ethic, his family's legacy, had been overshadowed by what the villagers now referred to as Adisa's curse. Adisa had tried, for years, to form meaningful relationships with the women in the village. He had courted them with the respect and care he had learned from his late father, a man who believed in the dignity of hard work and the honor of family. But every attempt ended the same way. At first, the women would be charmed by his kindness and strength, and some had even seemed genuinely interested in him. But once they found out about his size, their curiosity turned to discomfort, and discomfort to rejection. The first time it had happened, Adisa had been barely 18. He had been courting a girl named Elle, a shy but sweet girl from the neighboring village. They had spent months getting to know one another, and Adisa had been hopeful that this would be the woman he would marry. But after their first night together, Elle had left his house in the middle of the night, her face pale and her body trembling. She hadn't said a word, but the look in her eyes had been enough. By morning, word had spread, and within days, the entire village knew. From that point on, the women of Okiroko kept their distance. Even the girls who had once giggled about him now avoided him altogether. The older women warned their daughters to stay away from Adisa, saying he was unnatural. And though the men never spoke about it openly, Adisa could see the way they looked at him, a mixture of envy and pity in their eyes. Despite the gossip and isolation, Adisa had tried to bury himself in his work. His farm was his sanctuary, the one place where he could forget, if only for a few hours, about the burden he carried. He spent his days working tirelessly, planting, harvesting, and caring for the land that had been in his family for generations. The fields of cocoa and yam were his pride and joy, and he had become one of the most successful farmers in the region. But no matter how much he achieved, no matter how hard he worked, the loneliness gnawed at him. His only confidant was Ton, his childhood friend and the village's best fisherman. Ton had known Adisa long before the whispers began, and he had always been there for him, offering advice and support when the burden became too heavy to bear. On many evenings, after a long day's work, the two men would sit by the riverside, sharing a drink of palm wine and talking about everything from the village's latest gossip to their hopes for the future. "You're too good for this place," Adisa Tund would often say, his voice full of sympathy. "The people here will never see you for who you really are. They'll always see you as the man with the curse. You need to leave Ok-Iroko. Go to Ibadan or Lagos, somewhere where people don't care about such things." Adisa would always nod in agreement, but deep down, he wasn't sure if he could ever truly leave the village. Ok-Iroko was more than just his home, it was his identity. His family had lived on this land for generations, and leaving it behind felt like abandoning not just his past, but his future as well. Still, the idea of starting fresh somewhere new, where no one knew about his curse, was tempting. One evening, after yet another failed attempt at starting a relationship with a woman named Ronk, Adisa found himself sitting alone in the small house his father had built. The silence was suffocating, and the weight of his loneliness pressed down on him harder than ever. He thought about Tom's words, about the possibility of leaving Ok-Iroko behind and starting over in the city. But every time he thought about it, the same question arose: what if the same thing happened there? What if no matter where he went, his condition would follow him like a shadow, always lacking, always waiting to ruin whatever chance at happiness he might find? The next morning, Adisa went back to his work, trying to push the thoughts of loneliness and rejection out of his mind. But no matter how hard he worked, the whispers seemed to follow him wherever he went. The women in the market averted their eyes when he passed, and the men, though polite, kept their distance. Adisa had become an outcast in his own village, and it seemed there was no escape from the burden of his size. The arrival of strangers in Ok-Iroko was always an event. In the small village, where every face was familiar, the sight of unfamiliar figures walking through the market square or standing near the chief's palace drew curious eyes and hushed whispers. So when a convoy of government vehicles rode into the village one bright afternoon, the air buzzed with speculation. Among the group of officials that stepped out of the cars, one figure stood out: Kihind, a young agricultural specialist sent from Ibadan to assess the feasibility of an irrigation project that could transform the village's farming industry. Tall and elegant, Kihind's presence in Ok-Iroko was immediately felt. She wore her confidence as easily as the neatly pressed Ankara dress she had on. Her hair, coiled into neat braids, caught the sunlight, and her stride was purposeful, as if she was used to navigating environments where respect had to be earned. Adisa first noticed her from a distance as he walked his fields. From his vantage point near the edge of the farm, he saw the small group of officials walking toward the village center, with Kihind standing slightly apart from the rest, taking in her surroundings. He could tell from her posture and the way she asked questions of the village head that she wasn't like the other bureaucrats who often came from the city, scribbled a few notes, and left without making any real impact. There was something about her that intrigued him, something different. At first, Adisa paid her no mind. After all, what did he have to do with government officials or their projects? His farm was his life, and that was enough to keep him occupied. But fate had other plans. A few days after the official's arrival, Adisa was working in his field, tending to a row of yam plants, when he heard footsteps approaching from behind. He turned to see Kihind walking towards him, a clipboard in hand, her eyes scanning the land. "You must be Adisa," she said with a warm smile, extending her hand. "I've heard a lot about you." Adisa wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of his hand before shaking hers. "Good things, I hope," he replied, his deep voice carrying a hint of humor. Kihind laughed softly. "Mostly good," she said, glancing around at the vast expanse of farmland surrounding them.